Today, we have a very specific topic to discuss, and I'm just giving everyone a minute or two to get on, as is the usual custom here. You know what I'm like. I do my lives when Spirit guides me to. These are not pre-planned. They can't be pre-planned. When I try to pre-plan them, they just don't. They don't take off in that way. So I've learned to just go with the flow and see what happens and see what emerges and so on and so forth. So, today's topic, for those of you who are, okay, I see two people and I'm sure more will come, but I always like to start making sure that there is, even if it's a tiny audience, at least there's one person watching, that's good enough. So today's topic is going to be about collective work and individual discernment. And this is a point that I have felt the need to clarify and get into, especially now that I've started group meditations with my Tier 23 program. For those of you who don't know, Tier 23 is my monthly membership program. You get a lot more than you bargained for. You get very in depth astrological, psychological, spiritual interpretations, and a very, very potent monthly meeting. So, and the people who are drawn to me as part of the Tier 23 program tend to be people who have been doing this for 30, 40 years. They tend to be people who've learned all kinds of techniques and all kinds of things, and they're looking to align and upgrade themselves in terms of the way they work, or because they already feel a resonance with what I'm doing. Sometimes you get people who off the boat already know what to do and just feel a kinship and just want to go with it. So Tier 23, you could say, by virtue of its membership, is a pretty intermediate to advanced spiritual program. But even there, I find it important to specify what I mean by group work and what I mean by the collective. So, and I figure if those fellas are having, some of them are having an issue wrapping their heads around this is going to be a topic that is worthwhile addressing with the general public. So, let's talk basics. Now, New Age ideas talk basically give us the sense that the collective is this undifferentiated mass of energy which comes together when everyone is doing their things and everyone influences each other, and then we all kind of rise. It's basically the way it is talked about is so diffuse, is so dilute that no one really knows what the collective is. For me, the best understanding of the collective and the thing that really sharpened my thinking around this was an analogy that I found in a book by Shakti Gawain called Living in the Light. And I'll never forget this analogy. She basically said, the journey of working with the self is very much like playing music as part of an orchestra. And while she wasn't talking about the collective specifically, I looked at it and I realized that's actually what she was referring to. So she was talking about how each individual needed to do their best so that the collective, in other words, the orchestra, would sound its best. And in that is exactly the same principle that people who are wanting to understand what they have come here to do at this time could actually learn from. So when you do your best in whatever spiritual path, in whatever job, in whatever it is that you are doing that you feel aligned and resonant with, you bring that to that larger group. And it's not about you paying attention of what the other person is doing or you trying to link up energies in that way or basically trying to do a very enmeshed version of the Care Bear stare. What what happens here is that each individual, when they bring the best of themselves, create an organic sense of harmony. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes people are on a different frequency and they can find an organic sense of harmony with people on a similar frequency. People on complementary frequencies will find a sense of harmony together. And that's okay because the collective does not need to be one mass where everyone has to equally find a place in it. See, this is the difference between Piscean versus Aquarian thinking. And my work is very much aligned with the ages of Aquarius and what it's going to teach us. Piscean thinking, basically, it's not even thinking, it's a smoosh, a spongy smoosh that smooshes everything together and doesn't actually tell people what the hell they're doing. Whereby it's okay to dissolve your boundaries. I remember one meditation I'll never forget in my life. I had to be somewhere as a speaker at a place, and it freaked me out so bad because I was like, on the roster. I couldn't just go running out, so I had to like internally make sure I didn't take part in it, but it was such a violation of basic personal boundaries and autonomy. That memory, I'll never forget that. In that particular meditation, because everyone was so convinced about how sacred they were trying to create a bridge between the womb of every woman in the room, which honestly is, maybe rape is not the right word, but the kind of energetic violation that that actually creates is terrible, because you then end up carrying all of the trauma, you then end up carrying all of the toxicity and all of the attachments of the people next to you. But because the words sounded so nice and because the rhetoric sounded so nice, I think, with the exception of maybe two other people, every woman in that group basically did the energetic equivalent of unprotected enmeshment. And like I said, that was a huge, wide was like a huge lesson for me. I was like, okay, I must never do this. And unfortunately, that is the way people think about group meditations and collective work. It becomes an invitation to enmeshment. And that is not what people need, you know? And because I knew what I was doing way back then, I did not take a part in this. I witnessed it and I was like, you people are insane. And that particular group was doing all kinds of weird shit as well. But it really taught me about what not to do. So in my own Tier 23 meditations, I get people who start to valorize the idea of the group that's being formed there. And I basically go, no, you do not put your lot in with a group of people that you do not know, whose composition is changing, whose energetic baggage you do not need to take on board. This is not why you are here. And some people, I feel, have a little bit of a cognitive dissonance with that, because people are desperate for connection. They're desperate for anything that hits that spiritual sense of I'm being held and I'm being loved, up to the point where they'll do anything in order to feel the connection, you know? And that's the kind of energy that does not actually help anyone. It makes it much harder to actually figure out what is happening at a spiritual level. It makes it much harder to figure out where your energetic boundaries are and where the other person's boundaries are. And it does not work. You just get someone feeling really energized and connected by taking on the collective baggage of the person in the room and wondering why they haven't shifted. And I can tell you at least 90% of spiritual facilitators and seekers do this. I've seen thousands of people. They almost always do this all of the time. For me, I've always been someone who, I've never been someone who wanted to rely on someone else's idea and spirit. Not because I thought my idea was the best, but because I realized I needed to do what was right for me early on. And so I never wanted to look for someone else telling me how I needed to connect with the divine. I basically just saw, okay, does this work? Does this not work? All right, I'll take this on board. Or I won't take this on board. There's always been that inner sense of, does this work for me? Is this right for me? Is this going to harm another person? But a lot of people don't have that. And that is unfortunately one of the more negative experiences that the way New Age philosophy talks about the collective has ultimately generated. It's not cool. It's really not cool. So what does working with the collective actually mean? If not basically hugging everybody energetically and taking on all of their shit together? Well, it doesn't mean that. When you sit with a collective, when you want to work with the collective, the first thing you must realize is that the moment you try to focus on it, you will distort it. It's the observer effect. The moment you try to focus on anything, you will ultimately distort the outcome. And in that sense, magic, oh, that is my brother's alarm clock. So, in that sense, magic ultimately is something that we need to actually surrender to. Now, surrender doesn't mean that you don't do your best. Surrender doesn't mean that you don't hold your boundaries. Surrender means you do what you can and you let spirit take care of the rest. But what has happened here is an overextension of what people should be doing. Just because everyone now believes that they're either a starseed or a super dimensional metapsychic with experiences of 10,000 past lives, or that they are some kind of unique and innate being that has come here to bring light to the planet. There are more egoic variants of it, but really that's also the kind of energy that's filtered into the collective. People are just doing way too much. Instead of actually letting spirit do its job, they're meddling with the process. So where is that point where, where you go within your process and you say, okay, this is as much as I need to do. Let spirit take care of the rest. How do you find that point of where, diligence becomes meddling? And this is something a lot of people are not going to like thinking about. Because spirituality, at the end of the day, from my understanding, and I can only talk about my experiences and my understanding because you all got your own understandings. If you resonate with it, fine. And if you don't, also fine. But from my understanding, when you go into a space where you have done what you can as an individual, that is enough. That is honestly enough. The problem is a lot of people have not been doing what they need to be doing. And so there is that little desire to push it along a little bit. There is that little desire to go and just nudge it in the direction you want to go. That's called meddling. And we actually see these forms of meddling get enmeshed into certain spiritual paths and traditions that do not exactly align with New Occult law and do not respect autonomy and free will. Unfortunately, some of these paths are still worshipped as part of certain religions today. But do they take you to spirit? No. They take you to a very elevated and astrally refined version of a collective ego mind. So when you actually let go, when you've done your best, when you've given it what you need to give, not too much, not too little, and when you actually let go, that experience of release, that experience of surrender and not knowing, is that space in which spirit and mystery works its way. This is the biggest difference between the so called masculine centric and the so called feminine centric traditions. Personally, as I have said before, God is not in the gonads. Spirit is spirit. That's about it. So, but the biggest tradition, the biggest loss that we have seen in the past several thousand years is that willingness to actually surrender and let things emerge the way they need to emerge. Different forms of astrology, different forms of divination and prophecy actually end up as a very occult means of controlling people's free will, which is why a lot of people come to me after they've already had many readings that go, I tried this, I followed this, it doesn't feel like me, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And that is because a lot of people end up following systems that stray into meddling. Rather than letting the individual be empowered to the point that they can be empowered and let the divine take care of the rest, they then attempt to take over the role of the divine. That doesn't work. So you may ask, okay, so how do I participate in group meditations? How do I do collective work? You do the best that you came to do. The thing about group work is that the effect of the group kicks in by the sheer sum of the people that you have there. If you have people who are very awakened, who are very sensitive, the energetic threshold that the group as a whole will be able to access is higher. And that's all that is. It'll be easier for energies that are more refined and that are more aligned to come in. Similarly, if the energy of the group, in the sense that some of the individuals, is something that is, how do I put it? I don't want to use the word lesser, but let's just say people who have not yet quite taken the journey into themselves. When you see a group energy like that, no matter how good the facilitator is, it is going to be like hitting a stone with a stick and wondering what happened. So really, the presence of the group makes it easier or harder for energies to reach that collective space. That's what it's about. It's not really about you coming together and forming some kind of spiritual Mecca to go and do, you know, Mecca is in not the religion. Mecca is a mechanical thing that you see in anime. It's about coming. It's not about coming together to form some mega spiritual Mecca to power you up to make the changes that need to happen. And that's why you need to be very, very selective in groups. And you need to be very selective in what meditations you join. I have seen a lot of things, a lot of wrong things that have been programmed into this planet that are not at all in alignment with the planet's cycles, just because somebody read something in a book somewhere and several thousand people decided it was the right thing to do. And I can tell you that a lot of, honest to goodness energy workers have been undoing the harm that many of these misguided meditations have created. And honestly, if you are truly, truly listening to spirit, you don't need to meddle. Just listen to what the earth has to say. She's the master teacher. People keep trying to fix her. People keep trying to, purify her or align her when she actually knows exactly what she's doing. Rather than listening to the earth, people try to put more programming into it. That doesn't work. And of course, they use great words like, yes, I'm realigning this to this inner crystal, to that ley line, da 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 da. And people go, oh, yes, how exalted, how holy. And I have never seen any of these work. At the end of the day, the earth knows what she is doing. If you want to call it sky, if you want to call it heavens, if you want to call it cosmos, the skies know what they are doing. The problem is the interference. Sometimes it's people who meddle with half baked knowledge. And sometimes it's things up there that appear as visions and beings of light, and we've talked about the false light phenomenon. Sometimes it's earth based entities that are not in alignment, such as, for example, ancestors who have made deals with, shall we say, negative forces. So they are basically getting into alignment with spirit is also about cutting out the middleman or the middle person. It is about going straight back to that alignment with you. And the more people that you can find who can come into alignment with themselves in a complementary way, the stronger that beam of energy is going to be. But it starts with individual work. It starts with individual discernment. It starts with the willingness to say no. Now, saying no is to an energy form or a collective thought form or a group dynamic that everyone has told you is the bee's knees is actually quite difficult, especially when people really desperately want to figure out what to do with their spiritual abilities. And here comes along someone with a narrative that makes them feel like an avenger. But effectively, saying no to that takes a lot of humility, takes a lot of strength. Being bitchy about things and saying this not right, that not right, that not right, that not right is actually really simple. That part, it doesn't cost you anything. It's not actually something that allows you to grow. When you observe something and you know something is wrong, walk away from it. And if you are in a position to do so, if it's required, tell people about it so they don't make the same mistake. But just taking a position that's aside from all of these things and positioning yourself as higher of all of these things is another ego trap. By all means, meditate with others. By all means, do group work, but do it in a way that centers each individual has their personal experience with the divine centered within themselves. And as each musician does what they need to do, as each player plays the instrument of what they need to find, that's when the symphony is formed. The only person in the room that has any business in paying attention to what the person next to you is doing is the facilitator. That is the only person who has that business. And I've certainly heard about people who go through initiations and ceremonies where the facilitator isn't doing the job. Something else has gone into the client, and they spend years, months, if not years, wondering what the hell happened. And they're just providing a service without actually having that oversight. So you need to be in a position where if you are doing group work, you need to be with the facilitator who is able to take that distance and just watch to make sure, okay, is everyone calibrated in the right way? Is everyone bringing what they need to bring? Is this person bringing, opening doors they don't need to bring? It takes skill. That's not something you find overnight. That's something you find through years of observation, years of looking at people, years of understanding. That's not just about talking, it's about doing. So, when you can find a group like that and you can find a facilitator like that, okay, go ahead, go do what you want to do. But the moment you find people who use the rhetoric, the garb, the glowing lights, or whatever to make you give up your personal and autonomous boundaries, no matter how great it sounds, don't do it, would be my advice. At the end of the day, we came as differentiated aspects of consciousness for a reason. If our whole job was to become undifferentiated again, why would we be here in the first place? With each individual and each perspective and each soul journey and each spiritual path, we wouldn't need that. The universe does not waste anything. So value the fact that you have your individual sense of self and your individual boundaries. Boundaries are one of the most important things as part of the spiritual journey. The only space, like, as a hard and fast rule for me, the only space where those boundaries come down, like completely come down, is when you are in one of those very transcendental moments with spirit. And that happens very rarely. But the way people talk about it is that it almost happens every other week. That's because some other energy has come in, has blinded them, and they've gone, yes, I'm in the presence of the divine. The divine has told me to do this, this, and this. If you look at the history of the mystics, for example, the Christian mystics, the saints, um, they don't exactly have a tradition where God basically shows up every week with a grocery list of what needs to be done. These are impulses. Some may say that, that's fine, that may even be the case. But these are times where when they have had those transcendental experiences with the divine, and I reference that because it's one of the more accessible narratives for people to find, but of course, the same thing you would find in Sufism and so on and so forth. But when you go into that transcendental space with divinity, there are no words. So when you feel like you see a very specific thought form, whether it's a god, goddess, a very specific narrative, when you see all of that stuff, question it. Is this really the divine, or is this something appealing to my need to be seen, to be heard? God knows I've gone through the same process. I'm not saying any of this without having experienced it. But the only reason why I'm saying it now is because, well, as I am stepping into more of these group facilitations, it's one thing to do it as a one-off, but when you do it regularly, I realize, okay, this is a message that people might not want to hear, but they absolutely need, which tends to be my brand. But yeah, hopefully that adds a layer of awareness to people who are thinking about this, who are wanting to do this. Remember that humility is very important. Surrender is very important, but only when you are dealing with that absolute presence of spirit. No thoughts, no ideas, no control, just presence. And that's when you'll know if you've had that kind of a meditation, whether it's by yourself or with a group, that really moves you to that space. I'd say that's about it. That's what I wanted to tell you today. Let me just see the comments if there's anything that I need to respond to here. Mm-mm-mm. Mm-mm. Day says playing music with the group is 90% listening. It really depends. It really depends on the type of music that you do. If you're improving, certainly, but if you're certainly playing as part of an orchestra, I would say you'd still need to be aware of what you are doing first and foremost. If you're on the brass section and someone who is playing the strings is not doing their job, you can't stop what you're doing. You still have to keep doing what you're doing. But I hear what you're saying. Let's see. Anything else? Mm. Okay. I don't see anything else that needs to be attended to. Remember that the gratitude sessions are still going. You can access that at www.theskypriestess.as.me/gratitude. You can book these even for later dates until the 31st of August. And a lot of people have had a lot of shifts from these. This is my way of saying thank you for years of support. Because a lot of you have. You've been saying the costs, and that's a very good thing. But apart from that, that's what I wanted to say. That's what I felt like we needed to address at this time. So sit with it, see what comes up. And if there are no further questions on this topic, and I'll just give a couple more seconds to see if there anything comes up. If there are no further questions on this topic, we can call it a wrap. So just waiting, just giving people the opportunity to ask. Mm-mm-mm. Day says the show doesn't stop because someone messes up. Just hit the downbeat when it's you. Um, Again, actually, it does get very messed up. It doesn't stop, but you basically ruin the composition when you're not doing your job. But I don't want to argue with you about that. That's just it. If you're not actually paying attention to your work, you're going to ruin it for everybody. That's the key point. Let's see. Let me see why I was talking about this today. Okay, yeah. Chiron opposes Vesta in a couple of hours from now. Day says, I'm speaking from decades of playing music. That might be fine, but I've been into music ever since I was a child as well, and that doesn't that doesn't invalidate what I'm saying. I love you too, but no, if you screw up with an orchestra, that entire passage, that entire movement is going to be screwed up. I don't know why you have a issue with this, but that's yours to look at, not mine. So the reason why this is coming up is, of course, Chiron is at 12 degrees of Aries, opposite Vesta at 12 degrees of Libra. This is a time when each individual needs to look at themselves and their vulnerabilities and what is getting triggered for them. And they also need to look at how those triggers are coming into interpersonal dynamics with people. Of course, this applies with relationships, and of course, this applies in terms of spiritual work. And of course, Venus is about to enter Libra as well. So rather than being very, very, very focused on this is the way I do things, that's what I mean. They says no issue, just sharing experience. Thank you, but you do realize that I am trying to reply to people. But great, I'm glad you have that experience, but you don't seem to be wanting to take my point. Venus at 29 degrees of Virgo is exactly about this. Rather than being focused on what one is doing and the way one is doing it, this is a time where we have to just be aware of what we're doing, be willing to refine what we're doing, be willing to hear what is being said. If if it resonates, and if it doesn't, that is fine. But ultimately, as Venus enters Libra, we need to be looking at how we relate to each person and whether or not we, as our individual selves, have brought what we need to bring to the table. Are you doing your work? Are you reflective of what you're doing? And how disciplined are you with respects to yourself? And that, I would say, is really the key message right now. Taking ownership, taking accountability, and realizing how that affects what you are doing. So that's probably why this has come up at this time. And yes, Anna got it. Each vibration on a spider web affects all, and it's hard. I'd say that's a very, very good summary of what I'm saying here. You have one vibration that's discordant in a group dynamic, and you're going to see it affecting and influencing the rest. So, which is why I would actually say group work needs to be kept to a minimum rather than just going to anything that opens you up. The same thing can be said of family constellations, because that is one of the disciplines where I find people who really want to find healing, but they get opened up in ways that are simply not safe because the facilitator is not taking on board what happens when you open up a bunch of people with trauma and you put them in a room, and each person affects the other person because they are not paying attention to what they're doing. So the symphony that they create becomes discordant, and one person ends up taking more of the trauma than others, and they are the ones that then need more therapy to undo the work they thought they were getting in a therapy. So not the most fun message, but it's what needs to be taken into account at this time. uh, Graciela says flow, steadfast commitment, humility, sacred info, wisdom. I always like reading what Graciela says. She's always got the beat of it. She's always got the beat of it. Yeah. But in any case, I send all of you much love, and I send all of you very many blessings. And take care, and just be aware. Focus on yourself first. It's not about what that person is doing. It's not about what this person is doing. It's about you and the divine. When you're doing spiritual work, that is number one. That's about it. Cha-cha for now. Bye bye, sweethearts. Bye.